everyone.
Shake everyone's hand.
Yes. I could go around and personally introduce myself to everyone. No, thank you very much for coming to BAME's Positioned. Eyes wide open, fight or flight. You can see I went for the headline there. Today, we're going to approach this discussion through the prism of certain cultural proclivities that seem to remain consistent over the trajectory of this, well, I don't want to say situation, but it is what it is in that sense. And so it is complex, it can be quite sensitive, but we're going to move the conversation forward with that, bearing that in mind. So let me quickly introduce everybody before we go into more detail. So on my left, on your right, the far right, is Nadia Denton, Dinkesh Masuria, Darren Lawford, and Tom Edwards here. So, can we have Nadia's clip up there for me, please? Lovely. Now, Nadia, quick background about Nadia. She's worked in the film industry for over 10 years, curated for the BFI, the Institute of Contemporary Arts in the British Museum, consultant for London Film School, Brazilian Festival, Film Africa, and recently released the Black British Filmmakers Guide to Success, Finance, Market and Distribute Your Film, which is the cover of what's currently up there, and is currently writing the Nigerian Filmmakers Guide to Success Beyond Nollywood. So, first of all, Nadia, thanks for coming. What I want to do is for you to take us through your thought processes as to why you decided to write the book with respect to the film industry at the time.
Okay, so just over 10 years ago, I was invited to run a monthly film club at the Institute of Contemporary Arts, and at the time, they wanted to increase the attendance of African and Caribbean members of the public. I had no film experience. I kind of was thrown at the deep end, but I had a bit of spare time in my hands, and I thought, okay, this might be quite an interesting hobby. So I was tasked with putting on a monthly program of content that would attract the specified audience. And what I came to learn over the course of the time was that 90% of the filmmakers that I was working with and supporting didn't have any distribution platforms or avenues for their work, and largely were unrepresented in terms of having their work screened. So fast forward about 7 years later, I'd obviously been running the film club on a consistent basis throughout that time. And I realized that there was a richness in terms of the experiences that they were having, making their films, the various gripes and challenges they were having with funders and broadcasters, the joys and the highlights in terms of some of the content they had produced in that adversity and how it was being received. And it was not really being documented. I suppose I also was kind of kicking out at what I felt was at times a kind of condescending attitude from the States, where it was like we would get the occasional African-American celebrity or film industry figure, and they would be advising us about what to do. And I thought, well, actually, we've been doing this for quite some time. We already know. So I was quite keen to document that. And despite being advised not to have Black British in the title, I went against the advice from some of my would-be sponsors because I thought there was something quite unique at that time in terms of the filmmakers that I was working with. So in terms of where we were at that time, say sort of like 2004, 2005 onwards, where technology was, people feeling much more empowered and making content that audiences were receiving quite well, but wasn't getting any sort of wider mainstream support. And some of them were being quite successful, making quite good revenues from self-distribution of their films, having some quite interesting reception internationally, winning awards and so on. And so the opportunity to write the book kind of came as a sort of welcomed reflection to document some of the people that I've been working with. as well as to be able to give some advice to what I was seeing as a new generation of filmmakers coming underneath them who weren't aware of some of the good practice.
And so, in terms of it also being very informative about the practicalities of how to go about the process, we had touched upon the need to have a space where certain critical cultural dialogues can take place, and a feeling that there was a certain absence of this, or a space where we could have these dialogues. How would you say that this has or has not changed over the past 10 years? Would you say that we have created more spaces where we can engage with this, or has it become a claustrophobic space? Because in some ways I feel that it has, but please.
I mean, certainly I feel like in terms of the work of the filmmakers that I was documenting at that time and working with, and the industry, things have contracted. A lot of them have dropped off. A lot of the people that I've interviewed in the book are not actively making films anymore. When I sort of started running the film club and engaging with their work, it was very much people at the time were looking back to what was happening in terms of Black British filmmaking in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And as much as I found that interesting, I kind of thought, well, there's other stuff happening now. And these filmmakers are discussing other themes that are equally as valid. But I do feel at the present time I'm meeting a lot of younger filmmakers and people who just don't even know that they made this work. So I think unfortunately, I was able to ride what I call the Labour wave in terms of that government and institutional support, where the venues were, they were tasked with having to attract a certain percentage of audiences, which meant that it cascaded down. They had to program a certain type of content, which meant that the filmmakers that I was engaging with had more opportunity to show their work. Certainly now I don't find that to be the case with a lot of the venues. It's very much about more of the sort of commercial argument about, what is going to put bums on seats and what is, I suppose, more broadly applicable to what they see as every man on the street. So I feel that the space now, to me, is unfortunately very quiet, and a lot of the filmmakers that I would have supported now probably feel marginalised or feel like they have to look increasingly outside of the UK for opportunities for their expression.
I think that brings us really nicely onto the third question, because you're now currently writing the Nigeria's Filmmaker's Guide to Success, which is beyond Nollywood, which takes us further afield in certain ways, but contains, would you say, certain similarities with regards to the landscape, so social, political, economical landscapes, similarities in the way that the diaspora is viewed over here in terms of making films, and how the diaspora, Nigerian diaspora, and filmmakers are trying to break into, for want of a better word, the Western industry. Could you speak a bit about that?
In terms of the second book that I'm near completion with, when I was running the film club at the ISA and various events of the BFI, quite a significant proportion of the filmmakers that I was working with were of a Nigerian background, and even in terms of an audience, that was quite a pronounced audience, and even just West Africa in general. And what I kind of realized from some of the interactions with the audience is that even though, maybe I was tasked with profiling Black British filmmaking talent, they weren't so restricted. They wanted to see what was happening more broadly. And I suppose some of that, as well as my own curiosity, led me to penning this second book. I found that the energy in the landscape in Nigeria is obviously very different. Some of the things that people are saying no to and the opportunities we don't have here in the UK, they do have there. But likewise, some of the structures that we have here, and perhaps some of the sort of institutional direction that we might have or that we can refer to, is perhaps not so much the case in Nigeria. But I suppose one of the main things that really excites me about the second book is that I think whether it be filmmakers or audiences, we're all increasingly wanting to know what other people are doing. And we're all wanting to sort of engage and dip into it. And I'm very much seeing my guide as an opportunity to document the experiences of these Nigerian diaspora filmmakers that I've happened to encounter. Not just for them to have it documented, but also because I recognize that there is this international interest. Not just from Nigerian diaspora communities, but more broadly, whether you're talking about the wider African diaspora or even other audiences.
Okay. Dinkesh Masiria. Okay, I'm going to introduce what he does first, and then we'll see the clip. Now, so this is Dinkesh, who is a seasoned
Seasoned.
well seasoned, nicely spiced. Producer and director. He's worked on high-profile shows for the BBC, ITV, and Channel 4, including Panorama, Mastermind, University Challenge, Geordie Shore. I love reading these bits about, because it's just, shows how much he's done, with an extensive track record of self-generating commissioned work, including 3 RTS-nominated series. And he spends half his time developing original ideas from concept through to execution, with a focus on multi-platform propositions, including social media and online. Can we have Dinkesh's clip?
Some assistance.
Welcome again to University Challenge.
I'm Jeremy Vine and this is Panorama.
Who fitted this?
3 single people are about to meet for the very first time.
I had no idea that the UK had not seen anything like that before.
What do you think of my moves?
Well, I think they're pretty impressive, but it's singing we're after.
You were just literally messing around on some paper.
And it's not something that has happened to us overnight.
Dinkesh, he's the director, right?
What is sampling?
Reinterpretation.
Theft.
Hip-hop. Fun.
Thank you. Now with Dinkesh, actually, there's a prequel to this that I'm going to say. Part of the session, the first half of the session, is about reflection. And as I said at the beginning, we're going to reflect about certain cultural environments and how it is to navigate them. Whether we navigate them well or not, it's all a learning experience. And with Dinkesh, we're going to talk about career choices. So as a freelance producer, what would you outline as the challenges in your experience that relate to the industry's particular practical environment? And when I mean practical environment, we're talking about sometimes in terms of doing a CV, the work may not be consistent. And so you will have gaps in the CV and also working abroad. If you can speak to us about your career choices where these issues are concerned.
See, I've been producing for about just over 10 years now, and my career hasn't been something that I would say has been very easy to get to where I've wanted to be. I'd say it's been a struggle, but an interesting struggle in the sense that I've always wanted a career in TV, and that passion, if you want to survive in this industry, regardless of the struggle, you have to keep persevering. So, you know, I've had bouts of unemployment for about 5-6 months where I've had no work, and that obviously, every single year you end up having those gaps in your CV, which when you go to talent managers, it doesn't look very good because they then question, why have you got that gap in your CV? Are you networking enough? Are you doing this, that, and the other? I was going to careers fair, so that you've got the Beck2's things like Move On Up, enrolled in the Career Diversity Network.
You had mentoring from
and
that as
how
well.
mentoring as well, just to kind of give me that stepping stone, hopefully, pushing the the boundaries to try and get in front of execs and senior industry people out there. And it's great when you get to meet them, they look at your CV and they think, wow, you've got all these skills and you've got so much to give, I don't understand why you're not getting any work. And then you're thinking, well, there's my CV, why don't you give me some work? But we all know that it doesn't always work like that, and they can, I think, with events like Move On Up, you can meet senior executives and they can be quite you know, you've got to look at it from a positive point of view as well, that they can also give you contacts that you wouldn't necessarily get if you hadn't have attended those things. But in most, you know, at least 80% of the time, you know, you'd have the chat and then there would be nothing beyond that. So it came to the point where it was probably about 3-4 years where it was like that. And I just came to the point where, do I continue staying in the UK or do I look abroad? And then I thought, do you know what, I've got a visa to go to Australia, so I'm going to start doing some homework and basically look abroad.
And how was their reception to you when you had organised that? Did you feel that that was going to, at that point in time, pan out a lot better?
What, in Australia?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'd be quite honest with you, I didn't know what to expect when I went to Australia. You know, it was, you know, it's like, you know, walking into a, you know, it's a Pandora's box. You know, you don't know the way that they work, you don't know the culture, you don't know the protocols of how they do things. Obviously, in the UK, we do it in a certain way, and you have to follow it by, you know, trying to network or meet people, whatever. When I went there, I was just completely amazed by what I was seeing. You know, in the space of the week, I must have emailed probably about 30, just a minimum about 30 emails to various people in senior positions. And pretty much probably over half of those people, and I'm talking heads of departments, you know, heads of development, were emailing me back saying, come and have a chat. We've seen your CV. Let's try and work together. And then obviously within that, I was there for probably about 3-4 weeks, and I basically got told, come and work for us. We've got work for you. So that was it. Came back home, packed my bags, get everything ready, and then a couple of days later, yeah. Shall I go?
Yes.
So I packed my bags, and then on the Friday, and Darren, you probably won't know this actually, on Friday I got a phone call from the deputy editor of Panorama to say, I've got a job for you, can you start on Monday? So I was just like, what shall I do? So I was just like, I explained to her, I was just like, I'm going to Australia. And she said, oh, right, okay, fine, that's a shame, but good luck. And then something in the back of my mind thinking, I don't think I'm ever going to get this opportunity again. So I phoned her up a couple of hours later and I said, do you know that role that you phoned me up a couple of hours ago? Have you filled it yet? And she said, no. She said, all right, well, I'm going to take the job. She said, well, what about Australia? I said, look, these opportunities are never, you know, not always going to come about, and I'm going to take the gamble and take it. So I took the job.
That brings us very nicely into, when you had taken that job, did you find that your work after that was consistent for a little while, or did it begin to start another cycle of peaks and troughs?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's an interesting point, because one of the reasons why I took Panorama was because the thing that was lacking in my CV was anything that was a big show. And one of the things that I found when I was working with talent managers was that you'd go in and you'd show them your CV and they'd say, yeah, but you haven't worked on this show and you haven't worked on that show, and you know, I think you need to kind of like maybe go down a roll down. So at that point I was an AP, and so I think you might need to go down as a researcher just to get on those shows. And I was just like, well, yeah, I'll do anything just to, you know, get what I need on my CV. But I did a couple of jobs at the back of Panorama, and things I thought were going quite well, and then 12 months later it went from that to that, and it was like that for about 2 years.
And in terms of taking a role that's a step down almost to go a step forward, is that something that's quite standard in the industry and in certain respects? So if we can now, so in terms of the daily cultural environment that's, you know, cultivated in the industry, there can be certain barriers and certain myopic perspectives that you can encounter. And some of these are easy to spot. because they're right in front of your face, but some are quite subtle. They have a subtle hue. So can you speak to sort of with regards to independence versus institutions with the industry protocols in terms of recruitment, and so that we can have a sense of, as I just gave the example, that sometimes you do have to go a step back to go 2 steps forward, and it's not necessarily predicated on anything else other than the fact that that has happened to quite a few of our panel members here.
Yeah. When I left Granada, which was what it was called back then, I was a producer-director, and then an opportunity came where a staff job at the BBC, and I've always wanted to work at the BBC, so I was just like, right, okay, fine. And then the talent manager said to me, well, you'll have to take a step down as an AP, but you'll still direct. And I said, that's fine. I'd still be learning a new skill, and at that point in my career, I had just self-funded to go and work on the multi-camera directing course at the BBC. So for me, it was another way of, yes, it's a step down, but for me it was also to hone in my skills that I wouldn't necessarily get if I was working with an independent. But going back to the whole institutions and the indie sector, I think what I found was within the BBC, especially if you're a member of staff, is that they have to make sure that the people that they have got that are full-time are fully working. In the department I was working in, there was points where staffers were having to go on so-called garden leave because there wasn't enough work. So you have to think about it from that point of view, where if you've got somebody that's taken garden leave because there's no work for them, then how is the freelancer going to come in and fill in those opportunities that we all want, whether it's a researcher or an AP or a producer-director, when they're at home while the next gig's coming on? And the same thing with the indies. I mean, the independents are quite, slightly different in the sense that, it goes back to the culture of, if you've got all these reality shows, you've got the talk shows, you've got the panel shows, and the thing with those shows are that they breed a sense of, you get to work on one show, then you end up working on them season or series after series after series, and that's the thing that I face, especially when working on Geordie Shore, is that I just got in there by default, just by accident, because somebody recommended me. But the same culture happens not just on that show, but those big shows, because they're reliant on the same people making the shows because they know the format inside out. So it is a lot harder for people like you and me to, get those opportunities when you want them.
And I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. So how does that actually speak, in your opinion, to content? I said I was. I did give you a heads up there.
Well, I mean, for me, it just means that if you're having those same shows, and you're working from a runner who's then becoming a researcher, who's becoming an AP, who's becoming a producer, who's becoming a series producer on the same show, then you're just seeing the same raft of people in those same roles from one program work their way up to the top. So I'm not going to name shows, but we all know the shows, and if you take it from when they were first conceived to where they are now, you will see that those same people in the credits have got up the ranks, and it is very hard. It's really, really hard to, persuade people to take you on. I'll give you an example. I think it was earlier this year, and I'd applied for one of the talent shows that's currently on, and I said to the exec, I said, look, I don't have the big name shows like this, but I have skills. I have the skills, and I know I can do the job. So she said, yeah, okay, send me your CV. And she read my CV, and she didn't get back to me. I'm not just saying that's just typical of that show. But it's across all, across the board,
In that sense. Now we're going to speak a little bit more about content. We have Darren Lawford here. Darren has spent over a decade at the BBC. I love these bits. He helped launch One Extra and Panorama's digital team, secured a number of BBC Three documentary commissions, was the multi-platform exec for Our War, helped launch the global iPlayer. He then left to join Liberty as head of content before joining London Live, where his focus is on commissioning fresh on and off-screen talent for documentary strand platform 8 and Raw and a multi-genre youth zone. Can we have Darren's clip? Thank you.
I'm not saying that's good or right or whatever, yeah? I'm telling you what happens. It's a trap, it's a system that we cannot just walk out of.
You grow up in an environment where, like, you don't really see what's going on outside, like you're always going to be trapped in, that's what happens, isn't it?
I'm making a film about beggars on the streets of the city and what it's like in the
Benefit
street.
Street?
No, not Benefit Street at all.
What can a pound coin get you these days? Maybe a newspaper or a cup of tea? Or how about a warm, fuzzy feeling that comes from doing good?
That's all right.
I want to send a big shout out to all the people who are working hard round the clock to keep this beautiful city running right about now. We're getting through the night together, simple as that.
Some blood that's needed by a local hospital, so we're going to head up to the blood bank, pick that up, get it loaded on the bike, go save a life.
Paul Carter, ladies and gentlemen!
I'm about to find out if it's possible to write and perform material on stage at London's world-famous Comedy Store and still get laughs without going for the obvious gags.
I find that impossible too. I think you're mental.
I'm a bit worried that you are creating so much restriction for yourself.
Now let's deal with the obvious elephant in the room first of all. I know you're sitting there, I know what you're all thinking.
Because I've gone through life always wanting people not to laugh, and now I'm kind of asking them to.
10 years ago, my life was very different. I was at school and my boyfriend was sent to prison. I've never forgotten how hard it was to see someone I loved locked away, and how difficult my life became because of his crime. The family members of prisoners may not be in a physical cell, but they are still serving their very own sentence.
Thank you. Now, with Darren, there's a unique perspective here that we want to tap into, because he has worked with 3 different roles across 3 different environments. And so I want him to talk about his experiential purview of the kind of cultural environments that these have been and how that culture is propagated, in a sense.
Okay. The first thing I'll say is I'm a pragmatist. I'm also a believer that a dash of ruthless pragmatism goes a long way in this industry. Okay, so that's just the perspective that I'm coming from. So the BBC is an institution predominantly middle class and predominantly white, and I am neither of those things. But that wasn't anything that I thought was an insurmountable challenge, because I'd been to Cambridge University, which was pretty much exactly the same. I'd also gone to a comprehensive school in Eltham, where I was the only black kid in the school, but at least we were the same class, I guess. So you've got that element. And then a lot of the stuff that I focused on was either brand new, innovative stuff, launches, or youth-skewing programming. So even in the context of all of BBC's programming portfolio on whatever platform you consider, that's niche. So I was working in niche areas, whether it's Radio 1, whether it's One Extra, whether it's BBC 3. And I guess one of the things that I observed is that there would be moments, and they weren't deliberate moments. They were natural moments. So I think it's a really important point to make, where there would be an exchange. And that exchange could be between a runner and an exec. And it would almost always be a joke. And I would never get the joke. because I didn't know the thing that they were talking about, because it just wasn't within my cultural reference. And that was just something that would happen. Okay, so when I left, I went to a company called Liberty. It's based in Brixton, social enterprise, and their purpose is to enrich the lives of young people by co-creating content with them. They have a class mix, a very diverse mix in terms of ethnicity, but also quite a young company. So 12 years old as a company. The oldest person there was under 40, and the majority of people there were under 30. And so, of course, there, I've probably never felt more at home than I have anywhere else. I had more, I was able to tell jokes and be confident that 95% of the room would laugh.
understand them.
And there was rarely a joke that was told that I didn't get. Do you know what I mean? So, but that's just the nature of that environment, right? Now I'm at London Live. Now, London Live is owned by Yevgeny Lebedev, who owns The Standard, The Independent and The Eye. So The Standard was originally owned by the Daily Mail Group, so that's in Northcliffe House in High Street, Kensington. So we're in those offices. And so you've got elements of that are very much like a classic middle-class institution. But you also have London Live and other younger elements of other publications. So you've got ES Magazine and the fashion team there, or you've got Metro, whatever it may be. You've got The Eye, which is also quite young tonally. And then in terms of London Live itself, it's a pretty broad mix of accents, backgrounds, classes. And so I don't always get the joke there, but I've got probably a better likelihood of so doing. And also I would say that people are more curious. So if they don't get something or they don't know something, the amount of times I hear people just explaining stuff to one another about trying to get their heads around the story.
So would you say they had they were more prescient in terms of an emotional maturity or an intelligence with regards to the way
I think I would say London Live culturally is just more open to having conversations and finding out about different people and different ideas.
And it also seems as though it's perfectly pitched to occupy this unique position where it can actually speak in terms of content to diversification.
Because if we didn't, then we wouldn't be doing our job. And that's not to say that other people don't feel the same way, but that's actually our core purpose, is to serve our audience. And our audience is London, and London is ridiculously multicultural. So if you had disproportionately white middle-class content, you wouldn't be representing your audience, and your audience wouldn't watch your channel, you wouldn't generate enough revenue, and we'd all be out of a job. So there is a commercial reality behind that as well, right? But also because I would say, in terms of how they recruited people, in terms of how they receive ideas, because there is a genuine openness, anyone, and I mean this generally, anyone in London has an opportunity to be on that channel. Whether it's so for example, if you play music and you post a video online, you don't have to be a big YouTuber, you literally just post a video online. If the team like the video, you get to play out a show. If you want to make a program or a little snippet about your area, we'll upload it onto the website. If we really like it, we'll turn it into a show onto the channel. If, we've had people pitch us ideas and they've been one-man bands and they've got commissions. We've had people, so for example, F2 Kicks Off is made by an indie called Renowned. They had never made a peak time show before. It was one of Jonathan's first commissions, 16-ep run. Big primetime show. It's been picked up by Electric Sky. It's been taken to MIP. It's already been sold to another territory. One of the guys behind that company is a guy called Dwayne Jones, who went to the Brit School, and I knew him when we worked together at One Extra, and he was one part of Ace and Viz, which was a breakfast radio show on One Extra. He won a Sony Award. He set up a streetwear label. Then he set up a management company, and then he was making music videos, and then he made this show. And why did we pick it? Because it was a great idea. They had great access to talent, but also, actually, it's important to say, they came with a ready-made plan in terms of they had an infrastructure to deliver. I mean, that show has got stunts across all the major London landmarks. You've got guys kicking balls through a hoop, or a hula hoop that's held between the legs of someone that's skydiving. And they came with all of these stunts and all of these plans and a very clear way of how they were going to execute them. So I guess, yeah, we wouldn't be doing our job if we weren't trying to do that. So I guess that's also a motivation.
And what are you doing so that it actually stays this way? I mean, it's in terms of, because we had touched upon in terms of industry representation versus the ideology of representational content, in terms of if there were more BAMEs that were actually producing or working with their skill base within the industry, would that necessarily determine that they would do content that was representational? And what's wonderful about London Live in terms of what it's doing at the moment, it seems to be uniquely positioned where it does actually reflect diversification in terms of its content. So what mandate do you guys have that will continue?
The capital. If your backdrop is multicultural, then you're always going to be able to convey it. So, for example, the thing that I love about F2 Kicks Off is that because they do all of their stunts pretty much outside, it's very, very inclusive. So they could be, you know, if you go down a London street, you see lots of different faces. So by definition, if they do a big stunt in a London street, you see lots of different faces. And if one of your prerequisites is to be shooting content in and around London, you're not going to shoot everything indoors because frankly it's not going to look very nice. So you're going to have to go out and get outside. So you're going to have to, you know, by definition, you're going to capture lots of different cultures and different types of people. So it's a funny one, this whole debate, because for us it's a no-brainer. We don't even have the conversation. It's like, well, we're in London, so this is just what we do. And it's not, there isn't any conscious thought about it because it feels relatively obvious to us.
In that sense. At this point, we're going to stop for a moment and approach the sort of latter half of the session have the thought of, because we've reflected thus far. So now we're going to dabble our toe in the water, a little bit of repose, and see some of the things that are actively happening and proposals that are being placed so that that do take the conversation forward in a way. So the first thing that I'm going to bring up on screen is a few slides with a few choice parts of Lenny Henry's BAFTA television lecture that sets out, and this proposal is being updated currently on the TV Collective network. So they're still working on it. But the reason that I brought up this is to have a look at the main points of what his suggestions are in terms of how we can be proactive and move the situation forward. So I'm just going to read out just the bits that I deem that will give us an insight in terms of this. So he is using the BBC's use of Ofcom's definition of regional production in order to meet its nation's regional targets, and for a commission to qualify, it has to meet the following 3 criteria. Can I have the next one, please? Can I have the next? Thank you. And this is the 3 criteria. So basically, the production company must have a substantial business and production based in the UK outside the M25, and it must have its user place of employment, executives managing the regional business of senior personnel involved in the production in question, etc. Second, at least 70% of the production budget, including the cost of on-screen talent, must be spent in the UK outside the M25. And third, at least 50% of the production talent not on screen by cost must have their usual place of employment. So these are Ofcom's guidelines in terms of that. Can I have the next slide, please? And this is how he has adapted it to fit or define a BAME production. So he's taken that at least 50% of the production talent cost must be Black, Asian, minority ethnic, and you must have some sort of self-declaration in terms so that one can monitor it. The production company must be 30% BAME controlled, and all the executives managing the business must be 30% BAME. So he's positioned it as such where at least that in terms of meeting the criteria, you have quite a few options in terms of how it can work. And the third one, at least 50% of on-screen talent cost must be Black, Asian or minority ethnic. Can I have the last slide, please? And these are, I've just dotted down here the rest of the points that he determines what it needs to focus on as well. Now, this is one proposal that does have its flaws, but is very proactive. The second that I want to come on to is it's more of a manifesto. I caught up with a gentleman called Roger Grafe, who has a fantastic track record. He's from Films of Record as a documentary director and producer, and an advocate of diversity. And this is, his manifesto speaks to other ways of how we can be very proactive. Can I have the clip, please?
The manifesto is an expression of all the frustrations that I've had and other people have had in trying to reach the widest audience possible with the most interesting and challenging films. And there are a lot of barriers to them, and they come up and they go down and they come up again, and everybody says they want the kind of films we make, but then they don't really take the risks that are required to do that, unless you're very lucky and have the right kind of commissioning editor who also has the right controller behind them. What I'm calling for in my manifesto is for commissioners and controllers not to try and second guess the output of what will happen if they commission something, that they actually go on the journey with us as the filmmakers and don't try and expect to predict the numbers or the detailed content or the key characters or any of that stuff which they ask for now before they commission. And I think that's a complete contradiction in terms when they ask for surprise, they ask for fresh talent, they ask for all sorts of new material, but they want to know in advance what it's like. And you can't predict a surprise. That's a contradiction in terms. And in terms of diversity and talent, we need to keep backing new talent of all colours, grades and sizes, and everybody has to be included in the talent pool. And there can't be a default assumption that you have to have already done it in order to deliver interesting and exciting television. It just isn't like that. The best work is done very often by people on making their first, second, third film, or who've never really been given a chance but have a passion and an excitement and a vision and sometimes access to places that nobody else does. And I can give you lots of examples of that, but we all know about that risk is the currency of great television, and that's what we need more of.
We had a wonderful conversation in which we had mentioned how we educate the educated in terms of responsibility and emotional maturity. What would you say, because certain major broadcasters are institutional, so what would you say in terms of that behaviour, as opposed to the independent companies as well, that we need to really tweak?
Well, I think there are two problems here. That first of all, if people think and express, this is sort of cognitive dissonance in which people are saying all the right things but they're not doing it because they've got their handbrake on. They just can't really go for the excitement that they express and desire, and I believe they desire it, because collectively, as a group, there's kind of regression to the mean. There are people who just simply retreat back into safe, familiar territory. Celebrities that people know in front of, they ask for fresh faces, but they always really use familiar faces instead. They occasionally make an exception, and immediately that person gets seen all over the network if it's a success. So there's a way in which the journey itself, the permanent revolution of new risks, new talent, new ideas, is scary. And in order to handle that fear, each person who's part of that circle, the schedulers, the controllers, the people selling advertising at BITS, ITV or Channel 4, have to really encourage the others and say, we don't mind, we're not going to count this in advance, we hope it's going to work, but if it doesn't, we're going to learn something. And it's that idea that the journey is worth taking without the safety belt on and the handbrake on and all the things that stop them from taking real risks. That's what needs to happen. And my idea of what a grown-up is somebody who can handle uncertainty. And all the best films that I've ever been part of have uncertainty built into them. And that uncertainty is what makes them exciting and memorable. So far from being frightened by uncertainty, they should embrace it.
Thank you. So first we have Lenny Henry's proposal. Now we have Roger's manifesto. Now we're going to move on to Tom Edwards, who has just finished his role from the CDN. But first of all, I'm going to introduce him and what he has done. So Tom is a commissioning editor for BBC One and 2 factual features and formats. His development and production slate ranges from BBC's Crime Watch, talents like Alex Polizzi and BBC 2's The Fixer, new formats, The House That 100K Built, and as a programme maker, he's produced popular factual series such as Big Brother, Mary Queen of Shops, Wife Swap to the Undercover Princesses. So can we have Tom's clip? Thank you.
Becoming a musketeer was the best thing that ever happened to me. Till I met you.
You either be gay or you be Muslim. No, I think that is totally wrong. If my mum and dad can accept me, why can't the wider community accept me for who I am?
If we have gravitational waves at the level that they've detected today, it actually makes the physics, at its really, really early time, sensitive to a theory of quantum gravity.
Welcome to the Travel Show. This week we're coming from North America's stunning Niagara Falls.
You sort of get used to seeing images of young black kids in poverty, and I've never seen those same images, but with white children. I'm really thrown by that.
The bands are actually formed by a weather system which goes all the way around Jupiter with wind speeds greater than 300 miles per hour.
What's the problem?
I don't know. He seemed genuine. I don't think he's our killer.
Well, this case is weird anyway. If the killer can get all through a locked and bolted door, there's no point in catching them.
Because I'm deaf, distractions that might disturb other people, like sounds and people talking, that doesn't happen to me, so I'm totally in my own little world when I'm sewing.
The main thing is that the tempo is 140 beats per minute. Like that.
Yeah. Is that grime?
That's knocking on the table.
Okay.
They're not letting me do music.
Oh, don't worry. I'm sure Mumsy will sort you out with some private lessons. Only if you sell his pony. You got a pony?
Yeah. Everyone in our tower block has one living on their balcony.
Yeah.
See, that is too much humour now. For a Muslim, that's not acceptable.
I'm joking.
Oh, I thought you'd reached your humour limit. I have now.
Thank you. Now, Tom, can you explain the function of the CDN and how it operates and, you know, your role within it this year?
Yeah, I can try. And I should also say that that's not my show reel, in that I'm not responsible for all those shows. It's more of it was produced just as kind of a snapshot of some of the content that the BBC's put out over the last 3 months or so that features diverse faces. So it's my areas is popular factual as opposed to drama and so on. This year, again, I don't speak for the CDN, but this year I've sat on one of the working groups for the CDN, which is a commissioner working group. I think the CDN has obviously been one of the kind of agencies that has been at the vanguard or attempted to bring about change within the industry and make it better representative. They decided that thus far the way that it worked hadn't been as effective because they tended to second individuals that worked within diversity monitoring and so on, within, for example, the BBC, the ITV, and brought them into the CDN and tried to involve them in discussions around making change. And they wanted instead this year to bring in people that they felt were closer to the front of decision making. So they produced 3 panels, three working groups, one of which is commissioners from each of the different broadcasters, one of which is people that work in production, and one of which is people that work in news, senior people in news. So I've worked over the last 6 months or so on the commissioning working group to try and explore why you know, an insufficient amount of progress has been made thus far on and off screen, better representing the UK in the industry.
Would you say that that in terms of the way that the CDN is represented, that it is representational of the industry per se?
Well, it's funny. I mean, yeah, the CDN is, you know, and no one from the CDN is here to answer back, and so I don't want to do them down in some way. I mean, the CDN states that it is ourselves in the industry. It's representative of us as an industry. So again, to point a finger of blame at the CDN, in one sense, we should point the finger of blame at the whole of the industry, because the CDN is only the industry. It's interesting. The CDN is composed of a number of, it's representatives of only a number of groups and a number of organisations. So BFI's got a representative on the panel, BBC does, ITV does, Sky does, and so on. So it's representative of big industry players. Whether or not it's able to be representative of the industry as a whole is a separate sort of question. You could say if there's a problem within the industry in terms of representation, taking a representative from each of the places in which there is a problem is not going to necessarily produce a very representative cohort. So that's something that would be interesting to explore with the CDN if they were here. But it's interesting. It's funny, since I've worked on this working group, the thing that struck me, I suppose, the kind of interesting question in a way, is it doesn't feel like there's a lack of goodwill or intent to make a change, and yet, you know, you can feel like you're having the same conversation today that you were having 5 years ago, that you were having 10 years ago, lamenting the lack of diversity within the industry. And so I suppose the question I asked myself was, how do you avoid Groundhog Day? What can you do differently this time that will mean that that we aren't planning right now to be having this conversation in 5 years' time? And it's a difficult thing to answer. You know, again, it feels like there is an interest in making change and in making the industry more representative, and yet it hasn't done as well as you want it to do thus far. So what can you do? How can you do it differently? I don't know the answer to that question. It's something that you try and work at.
And that brings us really nicely into and this is for the whole of the panel. We're going to have a discussion about suggestions of how we could actually do what Tom is saying there, or how we can have a dialogue of how we do that. One of the areas is accountability, of which Darren touched upon yesterday when we had spoken about how that, with effective monitoring, could help with regards to this.
Yeah, and I guess, again, I don't think this is their fault, but it's symptomatic of a situation and an approach, okay? So, and the rationale behind it made sense, but there's also a downside to it, which is if you give a different broadcaster the lead role in driving the CDN, then the logic would also dictate that would mean that organisation will help lead change, then the next organisation will help lead change, then the next organisation will help lead change. The challenge with that is different organisations have different approaches, and they might have different ideas and different fits. So therefore, momentum can be lost. You don't necessarily have a consistency of approach or a consistency of accountability. So if, for example, an organisation like the CDN was just an institution, okay, that had lots of different people from the industry that had involvement, but they were almost slightly separate and could hold the industry to account, and had some sort of relationship with Ofcom or something like that, then that might help. But that in and of itself is not going to change anything. You need lots of other layers to it. But there is a sense that it would be good if there was more accountability that was pan-industry, and that there was a consistency pan-industry as well. It's very difficult to do that if that accountability business or place is moving from place to place.
Place to place. I know that that both of you were on a BEC2 panel very recently, which looked more at practicalities in terms of the industry. And one of the points that was brought up was in terms of, and Dinkesh had given us a wonderful example about how sometimes you have a CV and it has gaps in it. So, and we had talked about recruitment and how possibly that could be a way, a suggestion of a way in which we can address that.
Yeah, it was just, I was speaking to, it's funny, you know, when we spoke about this panel a while back, you just talked about a simple frustration that having a number of friends and colleagues and so on that weren't able to do, that could do good work and yet weren't actually able to do as much work as it felt that they should be able to, which is an understandable frustration. It was funny. I wondered. It feels like I was just talking to someone that came up that talked about that kind of eclectic CV, and that obviously presents a challenge if you're trying to make a decision about who to give a job to, and somebody's CV looks like they've been developing a career that means that this job is just perfectly right for them because they've worked their way to this point, and it feels like a sensible step to give them that job. That's, if you're trying to make, if it's one of many multitude of decisions that you're needing to take that day, then you may well take that decision because it just feels more logical than someone that's got a more eclectic CV that raises a lot more questions. You need to demonstrate in some other way that they are going to do as good a job. But it's funny, but it is self-perpetuating in some ways. It feels like there aren't as many new options coming forward, in any way, in terms of diversity and whatever else. And I suppose I wondered whether or not BEC2 could argue for there to be, for all TV posts to be advertised better, so that there's more consciousness. I don't know if I've ever seen a job that I've ever gone for that's been advertised. I've always wound up getting called by a talent manager, and I guess that must narrow the pool of individuals that are considered for a post. And if you were to advertise jobs in a more kind of comprehensive fashion, would that then enable a wider range of people to apply, not necessarily get the jobs? You then need to think about how does the interview process work, but at least there are more people put in consideration for that role from broader background.
I also wanted to touch upon, because Dinkesh, you've actually, even Nadia as well, you've had some sort of mentoring in terms of, yes, and so have you. You actually had the CDN. Yeah. How was that?
It was good. I think the thing with individual mentors is the fact of them having the time to spend with you on that month by month basis, because obviously they've got a day job to do, and if something comes up where they've got to go and meet a commissioner or a meeting's propped up, then it can be staggered back. So it's hard for them as well to get their time and actually get them to fix their time to say, look, we are going to meet on that day. But to have to actually get that opportunity to be on the program was great, because the time that you did have and any bits of information you could collect, you were able to clasp it and use it to the best of your ability to try and get work.
I have to agree with that, actually. I was on the CDN mentoring scheme as well, and I was lucky enough to have Sophie Turner-Lang as my mentor, and she'd actually helped set up the CDN. And we had a mentoring relationship for about 18 months. And at the end of that period, she took me out for lunch, and then she said, just so you know, as long as you're happy, you're stuck with me. And I was like, no, I'm quite comfortable with that, thank you very much. But that gives you confidence, and it gives you confidence in terms of what your potential is, and that any potential scenario that you might encounter, you've got someone that you can approach. And I think that's the challenge with mentoring, is that targeted mentoring is useful, but actually you almost need someone that's a mentor for your career. Yes. And if that was a service maybe that was being provided by an organisation like the CGN, that when you come into the industry, they would always make sure that there will be someone or a series of people that at every stage you've got the support that you need to give you the best possible chance of success. It's not a guarantee of success, but it gives you the best possible chance.
That's the time. Right. What I'm going to do now is sort of open up the floor for, first of all, actually, I'd like if you could throw into the pool of if you have any suggestions of what, in terms of being proactive, because that's what we have been looking at. So your own suggestions and your own experiences before, we get to a Q&A in terms of the norm where you just fire questions at the panel. I think that it would be good to sort of engage everybody now in a dialogue about experiences and suggestions of how we can do that. Certainly, we have a roving mic. Can we? 2, okay. It's a gentleman over here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Narinder Minhas. I've been working in the industry for over 25 years, and I think I've only experienced about 3 months of unemployment, so I've been incredibly lucky. But I think the source of why I was lucky was because in the late 80s, London Weekend Television took a massive decision then to represent London much better than they were. And a whole group of us, a whole generation of us came in that period. And I think one of the problems in the industry in the last 20-odd years is that actually those pockets of nurturing and development have kind of disappeared. Either they've been based around programs or they've been based around certain people driving the process. In some ways, we don't really have those champions actually inside the broadcasters or elsewhere. So I've been lucky, I'm an exec, and I do think all the levers of change are actually out there. I think the problem is that nobody's had the political will to actually push them through. I mean, children's television was transformed by a white guy, Richard Deverill, who decided that actually kids' TV needed to be represented better. He didn't have to go and find some kind of Lenny Henry type structure in order to make that change. He just decided in the way that John Burt and Greg Dyke did in the 1980s at London Weekend Television, just do it. Just fucking do it. I mean, it does happen, and you can change your profile, you can change your content, you can change everything. The other thing is I think there's a lot of muddled thinking about diversity. I think there are 3 separate issues, and the reason why the Lenny Henry thing is not going to solve all the problems is because they're all separate issues. There's the jobs issue, there's representation, which is actually what appears on the screen. So a family that appears on a property show that happens to be Asian is representation. It's not multicultural content. And there's a third area, which is actually content, which is, if you're going to make a film about Somalia or whatever and tackle the issues out there, that's a separate thing. And I think all 3 of these things get conflated. So I would say tick to Lenny Henry, but it's not the only thing. And my own personal solutions are really simple, actually. The levers are out there. One is exactly picking up what Tom Edwards has said. It would be really interesting to know what percentage of jobs in TV are actually advertised. I live in Ealing, and I've seen Ealing Council completely and utterly transformed by the fact that they took a massive decision that all jobs practically need to be advertised, even acting ones. We've seen 2 acting jobs at the BBC recently just given to people internally. Well, if you're at Ealing Council, you'd be applying for an acting job. So that forces an institution to consider who it wants, why they want them, etc., etc. And they're just, a novel solution of mine, which is I think we should set up a sort of, and CDN could be the people to do it, would be like a black talent agency. Yeah. Because essentially the talent managers are all white, really, and and they are major gatekeepers. I'm not saying that they're necessarily thinking in a kind of racist way, but part of the institutional structure of the industry has meant that they haven't really prioritized race diversity as opposed to other diversities. And I think if you had, and it's a very simple, low-cost solution, if you had about 3 or 4 people, a few phones, a few CVs, in the industry, who are quite senior, who would be running a sort of talent agency where they would be getting people on their books in the way that Curtis Brown does or any of these other talent agencies, saying, right, oh yeah, we hear a job's going, you know, Tom Edwards' job's going in the BBC. Right, well, let's make sure we give the BBC 10 CVs of people that could actually do Tom's job. And these people exist out there, they do. It's just that nobody's pushing them at all. And so you end up with an industry where it's word-of-mouth recruitment, no talent support, no champions, really, no champions of what you're about. Sorry, that's my speech over.
No, really good. No, it's good. It's good. Absolutely.
Hi.
Oh yes. Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Hi. I am a shooting assistant producer, and I'm Italian, and I completely I can share the same experience of you told about, and I was thinking about diversity is not just a matter of, in my opinion, ethnicity or color of the skin, or it's just also the different background. Because me, as an Italian, and most of my experiences in Italy, and I did a lot of documentary series, even if are international broadcasted, they are not considered at all in the UK. So because most of the time you don't have UK credit. So in order to reflect the multicultural environment of London and in the UK, I think we have to reflect about the concept of diversity. What is diversity? Diversity is what doesn't fit for the market sometimes. But on the other side, I think that diversity can bring a big value in terms of makes a difference in the television, because when you hire a professional with a different background, that diversity, he can bring a different point of view or a different experience or a different know-how on how we make things. And if we continue to use this policy of hiring people with a previous credit, what do you say, with the same show, with the same product, basically is something which is bad even for the television, because you're working with the same people and you are creating like a vicious circle. And I mean, it's like a repetition of the same things, and you don't create nothing new, and yeah, that's it. So I am in relationship with the TV Collective. I don't know if you, with Simon Pennon, and they are doing a great job in terms of promoting diversity, but not only diversity, like a cultural diversity. And I think I would like to highlight their job and what they are doing, because they are giving an opportunity for other people to get involved. And yeah, so.
Yeah, I mean, I know the TV Collective very well. I know Simone very well, and they do try and advertise as many jobs as they possibly can, and lots of people are engaging with them. But I do think there's a link between your point and the gentleman's point, which it would be far easier for a production company or anyone who wanted to hire the right type of person. And you have to bear in mind there might be time pressures, there might be commercial pressures, there might be just general logistical pressures. If they knew that if they were advertising and they were going to get new people, that there'd been some sort of filter. And it was a filter that was sort of industry recognised. So if you did have this talent agency, then you would feel you had the confidence, and then the risk wouldn't feel like a risk. It would feel, or if it was a risk, it would feel like a calculated risk. And I think no one wants to take an unnecessary risk, but I think everyone should be tried and encouraged to take calculated risks.
I'm sorry, I wasn't here at the beginning, so I don't know if you mentioned it about creative access as a route into the industry in terms of the talent, talking about the talent agency. But I'm an indie, so I'm an employer, so it's my responsibility to employ from a diverse mixture of people. And one of the ways that I've come across in the past year is Creative Access, which is a new charity as a route into the industry. And they do exactly that. They screen interns for me. They pay half their salary and I pay half their salary. And they advertise in different and new ways that I wouldn't traditionally advertise in. So I, all the time, have a Creative Access intern who's working as a production team member, and she'll go on, our one at the moment will go on to do brilliant things. We're about to have our next person. But I know that they're working with loads of broadcasters and indies and doing quite well, so that's another positive that's going on.
What do people feel about targets and quotas, out of interest? Is that okay to ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Oh,
well, I'm Andrew Chowns from Directors UK. I was going to make a different point, but I have got a view on that as well. We've just done a big piece of work on women directors, which some of you may have read about, women directors calling the shots. Because we're a collecting society as well, we have been able to use our data to identify exactly what percentage of episodes of television programs have been directed by women and by men, which I don't think has ever been done before. And what we then did with that data is go and see employers and show them the data about their own productions. And that's been an incredibly illuminating experience, because for the first time, production companies have been confronted with exactly what's going on their programs. And one of the things that we discovered was that every single one of them had no idea how low the ratio of women was, because they're all freelance, so they fall outside the normal monitoring that a production company does. So this was a big shock to them. So there's an awareness-raising issue at the level of an employing company that was really important for us to break through as far as gender is concerned. And we're going to do the same thing on ethnicity, because we can use the same method in our data. A couple of other things that were also came out of it. One is that decisions about hiring are very often taken by people under enormous pressure of time, and they often fall back on the people they know. And when that's happening, you are dealing with a very restrictive pool. It excludes new people, different people. And the second thing is, certainly for directors, it may not apply for everybody in a crew, but definitely for directors, they are all second-guessing what they think the commissioning editor wants. And commissioning editors seem to know very few directors. They know the most famous ones, but once you get beyond about the first four, that's it. And I've spoken to many production managers and talent managers who have put lists in with new talent, and they've come back with all the new ones crossed out. So I think there's a big thing about raising awareness. There's a big thing about making it clear to production companies where their responsibility lies. But there's definitely a thing about helping commissioning editors to find out who's out there. And I think a big signal sent by very senior people to their teams is really important, because if Tony Hall and Danny Cohen and David Abraham say, you must just do this, everybody, get on with it, then it will happen. So those would be my key points. And on targets, we have called for all the broadcasters to achieve a target of 30% of their output to be directed by women by 2017. I think they can do it. And if their senior people say do it, I think it will happen. So it's not an unrealistic ambition to have. But I think targets are better than quotas. Targets, I think, leads people to come to the right answer themselves, whereas quotas, I think, tends to make people think they're being told to do something they don't really want to do. That would be my personal view of it.
I just want to respond, because as an indie, I do whatever my commissioning editor tells me to. And I have had to go through the process of getting directors approved or editors approved or execs approved. And you're right that there is a limited list that people will accept. So I think if I was told I had to choose from this list, I would do it, because they're my customer, they're the people paying the money. Therefore, as an indie, I would do that. And I think that's a really, really good suggestion. The other thing I just wanted to say as well is, in terms of naming and shaming, I think I would be up for naming and shaming broadcasters and indies who don't play their part. And it was I was at the RTS diversity thing last week, and they were talking about in the 90s, and this is going back to the RWT point, I remember when I was at ITV, we used to have to tick boxes of how many people we'd included and that kind of thing, and it would be reported in the ITC report every, I don't know what was it, quarter or year, when the ITC would do a report and you'd have a list. That doesn't exist anymore, does it?
Yeah, Ofcom doesn't.
Yeah, you don't have to do that, and so why are we not doing that? And surely that's people should be naming and shaming it a little bit more, perhaps, because it's gone down since that was happening.
Yeah. Tommy, you asked about what is your feeling about quotas and targets?
It's funny. It's an interesting one. I mean, I think the difference between targets and quotas is an interesting thing. It's funny. I just spoke to a few of a couple of my mates that work in commissioning alongside me. Sam Bickley and Maxine. Sam Bickley's now obviously looking after BBC Three as well. And spoke to her about how would she feel about the notion of, it's representation. Actually, I was surprised. I asked the in-house to do a bit of research. The BME representation within the commission at the BBC is actually 8.6%, I think, compared to a working BMA population of 12%, which is better than in some other. The BBC actually does better than I think most of the rest of the industry in terms of representation. But I spoke to Sam and asked her how do you feel about quotas and so on? If one decided that we need to fill these 2 posts must be filled by someone who's diverse, for example. And it's a difficult one because in a way, Sam. I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this. But Sam, said that she would feel, I don't know, compromised in a certain sense amongst her peers if it was felt that somebody could, level a charge at her that she'd been given a job for a particular reason. So on an individual, personal level, if you are the person that benefits to a certain extent, or is whatever, takes a position because of a quota, it's a double-edged sword. And but by the same token, if those sorts of things, if that shorter-term pain is necessary to achieve a longer-term gain, then that is something that maybe should be considered. But that's why I suppose it's a very hot potato, and that's why it's targets are much easier, but then targets can kind of be not met and often are not met. Whereas quotas, it feels like you are defining an outcome that will be achieved. So it's tricky.
I remember yesterday that we were talking about an amnesty in terms of how we actually move forward, because this sort of echoes what you say, that there's going to have to be a process of uncomfortability that's reciprocal on both ends before we could actually do that. Do you remember, Darren?
Yeah,
in terms
no, I
of
do.
that?
And I think it's because if, as you say, all the levers of change are here and everyone wants to do the right thing, then we should probably just say, look, if everyone wants to do the right thing, then let's just focus on moving forward. Now, that doesn't mean that I necessarily disagree with what Kate's saying about naming and shaming. What I believe is you say, look, what's gone has gone. From now on, we move forward. And if we all agree that this is the best way forward, if you muck up, then yes, you should be shamed. But I don't see the benefit in retrospectively blaming people when there weren't necessarily all the processes or systems in place to ensure that they could succeed in helping other people succeed.
Sorry, just to follow up on targets versus quotas. I think it'll be pretty hard politically for it to happen, a quota somewhere where the Daily Mail will probably attack the BBC for introducing it. So I think if you had...
Yeah, but they've got short memories, haven't they?
Yeah, I think if you talk of it in terms of a level playing field, then I think the recruitment area is the area that you could probably have quotas. So you could easily have a quota on the number of jobs advertised. That could be an agreed industry standard. And I think that seriously would radically transform things if it's a pretty serious quota. 80% of the jobs have to be advertised or whatever, allowing for some flexibility. The other thing I just wanted to say is that the BMEs have to learn something from the sort of the way the women female directors and the organisations around female directors have behaved. I mean, I think what's missing, I mean, TV Collective's great, but in a sense, what's missing is a slightly more radical, robust organisation out there that will use freedom of information, that will actually campaign. They're not in the industry, but they're of the industry. Yeah. They're not worried about their own jobs. I mean, we could easily get through freedom of information, the number of figures from the BBC about how many jobs are being advertised. That's where the naming and shaming, I think, would come. And at the moment, we don't seem to have that kind of organisation. We're all scared of losing our jobs in the industry, so most of us don't tend to kind of speak out about it. Most of us are probably angry, and I come across a lot of other people who are really, really angry about it, but they're scared. They're scared of losing their job, so they don't talk about it. And I think there's a real need for a, you know, like the guy down there, the sort of director's thingy or whatever. It's just like we need an organisation, actually, that's more courageous, I think, than even the TV Collective, that will use their muscle and power, actually, to make change.
Thank you. Does anyone have any, because we're practically out of time, so does anyone have any questions for the panel? Wow, we're going to finish on time. We are.
Well tuned.
Thank you so much for coming, and please thank Nadia, Dinkesh, Darren and Tom Edwards. Thank you.